everyone. My name is Merlinda, and I'm a senior consultant at Ferrilli. I am a certified Salesforce application architect, and I currently hold 13 Salesforce certifications. For today's Tech Talk Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the Salesforce Optimizer Report, which is an out-of-the-box admin tool that was first introduced in the spring 17 release. So on today's agenda, we have what is the Salesforce Optimizer Report? Why should you run the Optimizer Report? When should you run the report? And then also, how do you run the report? Okay, demo time. Okay. So I'm logged into Salesforce right now, and this is my developer sandbox org. What you want to do is you want to click on this gear on the top right, and then go to your setup. And then there's two ways that you can find it. The first way is you can type in Optimizer, and then you'll see it down here. And then the second way that you can find it is you can just scroll down all the way to the bottom. It's actually the last thing that is on this list. So you click Optimizer. And then there are three sections here. The first section, this part right here, is basically explaining what the Salesforce Optimizer Report is. And it's basically a tool that's used to evaluate your Salesforce org to determine like how your company is using Salesforce, like certain Salesforce features. And then it's identifying ways that you can improve them, like whether you're reaching your limits, how to drive adoption, and so forth. And then the second half right here is talking about when you should be running it. And Salesforce recommends that you run it as part of your monthly maintenance before you install a new app from the App Exchange, before each Salesforce release, which we know is 3 times a year, or run it at least once a quarter. And then this part right here is where you actually generate the report, and it's just letting you know that once you generate it, it's going to save it into your Salesforce files. And then you run it by hitting this button. And then this third section right here is saying like, if you still have additional questions or like comments or anything, it's asking you to join the Trailblazer community where you can like post your questions, your comments, and hopefully like another Trailblazer will respond back and help out. Okay. So before I usually do anything in Salesforce, I like to Google it first to make sure that I know what I'm doing, especially if I'm doing it for the first time. So let's search, what is the Salesforce Optimizer Report? So we have an article from Salesforce Ben, which is a great resource. The second link is a help article from Salesforce. I'm going to open that. The third is another help article from Salesforce. I'm going to open that as well. And then this is a Trailhead module by Salesforce. I'm going to open that too. Okay, so run the Salesforce Optimizer Report. So it's saying if you're following along and trying to run the Salesforce Optimizer Report, you're not able to do that for some reason. Well, maybe it's because you don't have proper permissions, right? So what user permissions do you need to run the Optimizer Report? 3 things. You need to have customized app, you need to have modify all data, and then you also need to have managed users. And then this part down here is saying, how can Salesforce notify you that that the report is ready? They usually send you an email, but for you to get that email, you need to have some things enabled. The first is having the API enabled permission. And then the second one is in setup in email deliverability, you want to set it to all email for the access. And then this part down here is same thing as we did before, where we went into setup, we typed in optimizer, and then we clicked the create PDF button. So this help article is just explaining what is the Salesforce Optimizer. It's letting you know like the features, for example, because it's not analyzing all of the features that is in Salesforce, but it's saying that basically with new releases, it's releasing additional features that it's going to analyze. And then availability, considerations, and then run the Salesforce Optimizer Report. I'm pretty sure this is the help article that we just read. And then this one's talking about the mobile lightning pages report, which is beta. So you read that for more information. And then this one is a Trailhead module on running the Salesforce Optimizer Report. So you can see that in this module, there are 2 units. The first one is get started with Salesforce Optimizer, which I'm sure is just explaining to you and introducing what is the Optimizer report. And then this second unit is run a report and review the findings. So it's actually walking you through running the report and then how to analyze what's in the report. And then of course there is a quiz at the end where you get points and you can earn a trailhead badge. Okay. So after doing my research on the internet, then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do whatever I have to do in Salesforce. So you hit this create PDF button, and then it usually takes anywhere between like a few minutes to like a few days to generate the report, because the size of the report is dependent on what you have in your org. So if you have like a more mature org with a lot of stuff in it, then it'll take longer to create the report. Whereas if your org is maybe more newer or just not as built out, then it could take a shorter time to generate the report. And then as I said previously, once it's done generating the report, it's going to send you an email with a link letting you know that your report is ready. And then it's also going to save it to your Salesforce files. So I've already created the report. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to Salesforce files, just this window. So this is Service Console. You can be in whatever app that you normally use, and then you hit the drop down and then you look for files. So if you're in a different app, or if you're in Service Console but you don't see files because your administrator didn't add it to your navigation bar, you can always hit edit and then add that item yourself by clicking on add more items. Okay, so I am in Salesforce files, and you can see that there are 2 files that were generated. I generated this last week, so hence the date of last week. The 2 files that it generates is an Excel file and then also a PDF file. So I have it generated in a sandbox, which is my developer sandbox, but I'd recommend that you run the optimizer report in your production org, because the results that you get from your production org could be different than the results from your sandbox, because maybe your sandbox isn't identical to production, depending on what sandbox you're using and then when the last time you refreshed was. And then to download, you want to hit this arrow and then hit download, and then same with this one, hit the down arrow and then hit download. So I've already downloaded it onto my desktop. So let's take a look at it. So it comes with this Excel sheet, which is relatively new because this wasn't, I haven't seen this in the past, which is really useful because it's summarizing your entire report for you on one page. We'll go through it together. And then this is the actual reports. Okay, so Salesforce Optimizer Report, this is when it was generated last week. This is your org ID, and if you don't remember where to go to find your org ID, you go to setup and then my company or company profile, and then I'll show you your org ID. And then this one's saying sandbox because I generated it in a sandbox, but if this were production, then it wouldn't say that. And then it's explaining to you what is in this report. And as mentioned previously, it's basically analyzing your Salesforce implementation and how your company is using certain features, and then also how you can improve your implementation, right? And then it's saying, how do I use this report? And it's saying each section is given an impact scale icon, and then it's telling you how it's impacting your org, and it's also giving you recommendations for how you can like optimize it or like fix it, depending on what it is. So impact scale, each section that it like analyzes, it's going to give it one of these icons, where the green icon is no action needed because whatever you're doing is currently aligned with Salesforce's best practices. And then there's the yellow icon, which is like low impact, but you should probably still look at it. orange is medium impact, and then red is high impact, which is like, you need to look at it right now. And then purple is just features, things that they recommend that you should enable, like Salesforce features that you should enable so that you can like make use out of Salesforce, like really take advantage of Salesforce and its features. And then this section right here is giving you additional resources in addition to this report, which is one, joining the Trailblazer community, specifically the success community, and then two, signing up and attending one of their webinars. Okay, so this is the table of contents. And it's basically breaks down your Salesforce into 3 sections. You have your monitor limits, which is talking about like your org limits and your object limits, right? Because Salesforce is a multi-tenant environment and there are limits. And then the second section is optimizing and maintaining your Salesforce org. So things that you can do to optimize Salesforce, things that you can do to maintain your current Salesforce org. And then the last section is increasing adoption, making sure that your users are actually like in Salesforce and using Salesforce. And then these sections right here, like everything in between, it varies depending on what's currently in your org. So I can run this now and I can run this like maybe 6 months from now. And these subsections could be different depending on what is in your org. So you wanna run this report frequently to maintain your Salesforce org. Okay, so then on this Excel sheet, you can see this part says TOC, which is like this table of contents, that's what it stands for, and then section, and then type. So basically, to find the section that you want in the report, you want to look at, so for example, let's say I'm trying to look at row 2. So I'm looking at optimize and maintain. So that's this section right here, right? And then fields. So that's this section right here. And then column C, fields on page layout. So that's this one, fields on page layout. And then when you click it, it's going to bring you to that section of the report, and then you can read about the impact of this and then what Salesforce's recommendation for you is. But I'm not going to go to that section just because this is listed as great work. So usually what I do is I like to like filter out this Excel and look at the high impact, and then look at the medium impact, and then look at the low impact. So I'm scrolling, and then it doesn't look like there's anything that is high impact. So I'm gonna go to anything that says medium impact, and it looks like this one is the only one that is tagged with medium impact. So I'm gonna go to that section of the report. So optimize and maintain, right? So that's here. And then user management, so that is here. And then administrator permissions. So that's this part right here. Okay, so this is what it's saying. Observation. For this report, we define an administrator as a user who has both the customized app and modify all permission in Salesforce. So this can be a little bit confusing because when I think administrator permissions, I'm like, oh, well, anyone with the sysadmin profile, right? But they're defining it as anyone with the customized app permission, and then anyone with the modify all data permission. So it's saying you have a very high number of administrators, and then it's saying we currently have 4 administrators, and then Salesforce recommends that you have 1+ full-time administrator for up to 74 users. So in this org, we have, I think, 60 something users. So it's saying Salesforce says that you should probably only have 1 administrator for every 74, but we have 4. So what is the impact? And then Salesforce will break it down between these 2 sections. One is impact, how is it impacting your org? And then recommendation, what does Salesforce recommend? So impact, having too many administrators can make it more difficult to keep your settings and data secure, right? Because if you have a bunch of admins in your org that maybe doesn't necessarily need admin permissions, well, they're able to like customize your apps. They're able to like modify all the data in your Salesforce org. So your data is not very secure if you have a lot of people that can do that when they don't necessarily need to do that. So Salesforce's recommendation is that you should reduce the number of users that have the customized app and the modify all data permissions. And then how do you do that? And then it provides resources here for you. So click into it. And then this one's teaching you how to edit users, right? So it's saying go into setup in your quick find box, type in users and then click on users. And then beside the user that you want to edit, you want to hit edit, and then you want to make the changes, and then you want to hit save, right? And then there's additional articles that you can read, like profiles, right? Because maybe they're assigned the sysadmin profile. Maybe it's not necessarily just 2 permission sets. It could be the sysadmin profile that they're actually assigned to. And then there's also 2 Trailhead modules that you could also do. And then as you scroll, it's showing you the 4 users in Salesforce that actually have both the customized app and the modify all app permissions. So these are the 4 users, and it's telling you which 4 users. So it's saying, go and check whether they actually need these 2 permissions. Okay. Okay. So then after I do all of the medium impact ones, I'll go in and do the low impact ones. So it looks like these are the 2 low impact ones. And then same thing, right? I'd go into the table of contents, and then look for optimize and maintain, look for lightning pages. Where is lightning pages? What? Replacing related lists with related list quick links. Oh, here it is. And then I click into it and read what the impact is and then what the recommendation is. Okay, so then after the table of contents, there's this high impact issues section. And this high impact section is basically just pulling all the high impact issues and then putting it here so that you can see it all at once before like actually digging into the rest of your report. So this one's just saying 19% of our users haven't logged in lately. 12 users haven't logged in lately, and that's equivalent to 19% because we have 60 plus users. And then it's saying, determine whether these users actually need access to Salesforce, because if they don't need access to Salesforce, then they're consuming a Salesforce license, right? And that's counting towards your costs. And then also maybe they're like no longer an employee at your company, you know, and you forgot to deactivate their account and they're just sitting there consuming a Salesforce license and costing you money. So, and then once you can click into it and then it's gonna show you which users are not logging in and how long they haven't logged in for. And then you go in and check. And then you fix that by deactivating their Salesforce user if they no longer need it. So that is the Excel. So I don't think I'm going to go through all of these sections, but definitely going to quickly go through the more important ones. So this first section is monitoring your limits, which is the org limits and the object limits. So let's do that. Okay, so before each section, there's also a summary. So you're going to see 3 of these. It's basically the summary for the monitor limits. It's going to have a summary for the optimize and maintain, and then a summary for the increase adoption. So I like to glance at this and look at, okay, which one has the green icon, which one has the yellow, the orange, and then especially the red, which is the high risk. And requires immediate attention. So this looks good. It's all green check marks. And you'll see like this one says file storage limits, data storage limits, and static resources limit. It's saying 0% in use for both, which is why it's giving a green check mark. If it were to reach 70%, then it would give like an orange check mark, orange icon, right? So the reason why it's 0%, 0 megabytes and 0 megabytes is because we're in a sandbox, developer sandbox, which of course has no files in it. But if I hadn't run this in production, then obviously it would actually show a percentage. So that's that. Yeah. Okay, so same thing, right? File storage limit, there's the data storage, and then the static resource. So what it's saying is if you meet or exceed, right, the impact section, if you meet or exceed your file storage limit, then users receive errors and they can't add new files to Salesforce. Okay, so then its recommendation is one, you need to like archive and delete your old files, right? Two, and then delete them in Salesforce, obviously. And then two, you could contact your Salesforce account executive and you can purchase more storage space. And then three, there actually is a third option, which is that you could upgrade your edition of Salesforce, because that's actually how you get more space, right? Because it's determined by your edition and the number of users. So those are your three options for either purchasing more space or just purging your files and deleting them out of Salesforce if they're not being used. And then data storage is the same thing, where you can delete or purchase. And then same with static resource limit. Okay, so then this next section is the object limits. So the top part was like org limits. This one's object limits, which also has limits. So this one's talking about the custom field limit. So it's saying you have 500 fields per object, right? So it's only looking at custom field limit. It's not looking at standard fields. So it's saying for these 5 objects, because this report actually only looks at your top 5 objects that you're using, which is the number of custom fields that you have per object. These 5 have the most custom fields per these objects. But they're all between 0 and 350, which is why it's saying great job, and it's giving me a green icon, because if you have more than 350 custom fields on these objects, then you're going to get into the orange, and then you're going to get into the red. So what is the impact? The impact saying if you can't add new fields to an object when you reach the field limit for your edition. So it's letting us know that this is based on your edition. So if you have an upgraded version, then you're going to be allotted more fields per object. But for this edition that we're on, we have 500 fields per object. So what is the recommendation once you start hitting these limits or getting near these limits is you should delete custom fields that your users don't use or need. And it's actually sort of really important when you're like an administrator and you're maintaining the org, because if you have like so many fields and you're trying to add a new field to a page layout, you're like, okay, well, there are, 3 start date custom fields that were created over the X number of years. And you're like, which one should I use? And you got to figure out which one's being used, which one's not being used. It gets really confusing. As the years go by, especially with like turnover, and then you have like a new administrator that's creating new fields, and then they leave, and then you have another administrator and they're creating new fields, and then it just gets really cluttered and you don't know what's being used and what's not being used. And another tip is if you are going to be deleting custom fields or like existing fields, remember to like export the data out of that field and then re-import it into another field that you're actually using. That way you're not losing that historical data. And then same thing as before, you have documentations so that you can read more about it, because this is pretty brief. Even though it's to the point and it's concise, it's still pretty brief. And if you want to learn more about it, here are the links, which makes it really convenient. And then you could also always Google it. Active sharing rule limits, it's saying that you have 300 sharing rules per object. And then why do you not want to have a lot of sharing rules? It's because it takes up a lot of time to save and load records, because every time you load in new records, or like let's say you change the owner on a record and then you hit save, it has to recalculate all of those sharing rules. So this is to increase speed. Okay, so active workflow rule limits. So if you have more than 35 work active, right? So it's not like workflow rules that are inactive. This is specifically workflow rules that are active and you're actually using it. If you start nearing 50, you can't have more than 50 workflow rules that are active. And what do you have to do if you use up all 50 of your allotted active workflow rules? Salesforce is telling you that you have to consolidate your workflow rules into a single process builder. And this actually happened at the last company that I worked at, where we did hit the 50 active workflow rules. I think it was either account or contacts, I don't remember. But what we ended up doing was consolidating. We needed to create a process builder for that object, and then consolidate our workflow rules and basically deactivate them and then move them over to a process builder, where each node in the process builder is one of your workflow rules. So that's this. And actually another thing with like having it in a process builder as opposed to workflow rules is you can control the order that the automation kicks off. Whereas if you have multiple workflow rules on the same object, like you don't know what order it kicks off, right? And it could kick off in a different order each time. Whereas if it's a process builder, you're specifying what the order is. So that's another good thing about having your automation in process builder compared to workflow. And then also it's all in one place, assuming that you have one process builder per object. Active validation rules. So this is saying if you have, this is saying that you can only have 100 validation rules per object. And it looks like we only have one validation rule on one object. So we're not hitting the limit. Okay, so this is the second section. So remember, there's 3 sections. There's monitor limits, there's optimize and maintain, and then increase adoption. So now we're starting to see some yellows, which is the low impact items. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail, I don't think, but we'll look at some. So this one is detail tabs on record pages. So it's basically, let's look at our Salesforce org. Okay. One page contains a details tab with a high number of fields, and it's the opportunity lightning record page, and click into that, and then I'll hit edit. And then there's no data available, obviously, because I'm in a developer sandbox. But it's basically saying that on this lightning record page, there is a detail tab, and that's this detail tab, right? And then on that detail tab, it's saying that you have a page layout, which is this page layout right here. And it's saying that that page layout has 52 fields on that page layout. So it's taking a long time to load. Salesforce recommends that you have between 0 to 50 fields on a page layout. And the second thing that it's telling you down here, it says, moving the detail tab so that it's not being shown by default. So you see that there are 3 tabs here. There's activity, there's details, and there's chatter. When you click into this, you can see that the default tab is the details tab. So it's telling you not to do that, basically, because then it's going to load that page layout that has more than 50 fields, and that's the first page that's going to load. And so it's saying it's going to take a long time to load. So it's saying you have 2 options, right? The first option is in your page layout in here, start removing fields that you're not using so that you have less than 50 fields on that page layout, or B, don't put details as your default tab, because that's the tab that's containing your page layout. So maybe you want to change it to activity, or maybe you want to change it to chatter. That way it doesn't load initially as soon as you click into the record, but rather like it'll load, like let's say it's loading activity because that's the detail, then because that's the default, sorry, then details won't load until you actually click into the tab. So it's not loading initially, it'll load later when you click into the tab. So that's what this details tab on record pages is saying. Okay. Unused reports. So it's saying there are 76 reports that are not being used. So maybe it hasn't been run in the last X amount of days or months, or maybe it's never been run because maybe you downloaded, some reports and dashboards from Exchange that you don't use. So it's telling you that you should delete these reports because it's cluttering up your org. And then this one is unassigned page layout. So it's saying we have 2 page layouts that are not assigned to a record type. So as you know, page layouts are assigned to a profile and a record type. So it's saying you have some page layouts that are just sitting there that's not being assigned. So it's not being used. So it's telling you to delete it because it's cluttering up your org, but also because it can get really confusing when you have a lot of page layouts, especially if you have a more mature org. And this happens sometimes because you're like, okay, well, I'm going to edit a page layout, but I'm actually going to clone it first so that I can make my edits to the clone version. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to leave the page layout, the original version there for a while, just in case I ever need to switch it back if there are any issues. And then, a month passes by and then a year passes by and you forget that you still have the old page, the initial page layout that you never ended up deleting. And then maybe there's like turnover and then new admins. And then you're like, okay, what are all these random page layouts in my org? And I don't know which ones are useful and which ones are not. Okay. 2 lightning pages might not be taking advantage of the related list quick links. So what this is saying is in your lightning record page is right here, you have your different components, right? So usually we have this related lists component, which is this one right here. And then this one is just showing all of your related lists for this opportunity page layout, whatever page layout is assigned to you that you're viewing. But if you have a lot of related lists, then you could be scrolling. It's like when the user is viewing the actual record, they could be scrolling and scrolling and scrolling just to get to the bottom of the page layout, especially since this section is so narrow, it can go on for a really long time. So Salesforce is saying that to minimize your scrolling, you could take advantage of this related list quick links. So I'm gonna add it, I don't know, here just to show you. Oh wait, we already have it here. Okay, okay. We already have it added. So this related list quick links is basically like in Salesforce Classic, you know how you have a component on the top where it's just a bunch of hyperlinks and you can hover over it. And when you hover over it, it actually shows you the related or like the first few records from that related list and like the information from it. This is basically like the Salesforce Lightning version of that hyperlink section. That way you don't have to scroll to find which related list you want to look at. You can just hover over the hyperlink and then it will have a pop-out window that shows you information from that related list. So that's what this is saying that you should take advantage of the quick links. And the reason why it probably is on this lightning record page, but it's saying it's not on here is probably because the 2 that it's referencing in here is a different, maybe a different object. Or it could be opportunity, but a different app. Okay. And then same with here, we have 6 workflow rules that are inactive. And it's saying that you should delete these inactive workflow rules. And I've seen this happen as well, where you're like, okay, well, business processes have changed, so we no longer need these workflow rules. Let's deactivate them. And then you go ahead and deactivate them, but you decide to keep them, but leave them inactive because just in case we ever need them again, you don't want to have to recreate them. Or just in case, I don't know, they change their mind or whatever the reason is, you're keeping it there just in case, right? And then as time passes, you forget that, you should go back and actually delete them. Hence the 6 workflow rules that are inactive that we should delete. And then this one saying, we already looked at this one earlier, which is that high impact one, and saying that there's 12 users that are not logging into Salesforce lately, right? So there could be several reasons for that. It could be like, maybe it's an old employee that you forgot to deactivate and they're no longer with us, and that's why they're not logging in. It could be because maybe people are not logging into Salesforce because they don't know how to like use Salesforce. Maybe you need to provide more training. It could be because maybe it's easier to use Google Docs and Google Sheets to like do your work than to use Salesforce. So perhaps you need to build out your Salesforce so that it's more customized towards what your business needs are. So that's what this is. And then administrator permissions, we already looked at that as well. You should only have one administrator per, well, in this report, it says 74 users. So it's one admin per 74 users, but I've actually ran this report on different orgs. And then one of the orgs that I ran it on, it said that they should have one Salesforce admin per 30 users. So I'm not sure how that is being determined by Salesforce. What my guess would be is probably dependent on like how mature your org is, or maybe like how long you've had your org, because that other org where Salesforce recommended 1 per 30 was a newer org, like within a year old, whereas this org is, you know, over a decade old. So maybe you don't need as many administrators, I'm not sure. And then this is saying that we have some custom roles and custom profiles that don't actually have users assigned to them. So it's telling you to look at them, and then if they don't need it, delete the roles and the profiles. And then it keeps going, and then you want to go through everything, which I'm not going to go through. And then the very last section is this increased adoption. So this increased adoption is saying, how can you get your users to like use Salesforce more, right? How can you get your users to take advantage of Salesforce? So this one's talking about unsupported browsers. I think like Internet Explorer 10 maybe is no longer supported by Salesforce Lightning. And then out-of-date browsers, maybe they're not up to date. And then this one's saying you should, is saying that you should enable chatter and then run the optimizer report again. And I actually looked into this one. Let's see. And then we do actually have chatter enabled, which I was like, but we do use chatter. How is it not enabled? So what I think this is saying is not about like enabling chatter, but well, yeah, enabling chatter, but I think it specifically is talking about users with the chatter-free licenses, because we actually don't have any users with chatter-free licenses. Everyone's assigned a Salesforce license. So this is talking about, you know, actually using chatter for people who only need access to chatter, or the chatter external licenses for external users that need access to chatter, then this makes sense, and so forth. So file adoptions, and it's saying 0 because this is a sandbox org, so it thinks that we don't have any files. And then a recommended feature, this one's recommended using macros, which is for Service Cloud. And yeah, so those are the 3 sections, and that's it. So looks like that's the end of the report. If you still have additional questions about your report, you could always join the Salesforce Success community and post your comments and questions there. And this is also actually the end of our presentation. And if you have any additional questions for us, you can always call us at this number, and you can always visit us at Ferrilli.com. And that's it. So that's how I run the Salesforce Optimizer report, and that's how I analyze it. Thank you. Hope that was helpful.